Ozone 5. Now, as I said earlier, if you haven't got Ozone 5, I still recommend listening to this half of the video because I'm going to be talking through the equalizer, reverb, dynamics, multiband compressor, that sort of thing. So if you've got any of those inserts, it's still worth listening to what I do just to see the workflow and perhaps do the same thing with your inserts. But that said, I would highly recommend Ozone 5. It is probably one of the best plugins I've purchased in the last 2 or 3 years. It's a wonderful value for money. There are 7 modules, as you can see down the bottom here. There's an equalizer, reverb, harmonic exciter, dynamics, which is a multiband compressor, stereo imaging, a post equalizer, and a maximizer. So 7, and they're really nice quality. It's one of those plugins that does have a slight sound that it colors when you turn it on, but it's in a good way. It sounds good. You just put something through it and it sounds good. And that alone is worth some money. But the standard version, which I have here, costs, I think it was about £200 or £250, which is probably about $300, $350. There is an advanced version, which is a lot more expensive, another £500 on top of that. Now, you get a couple of extra settings in each of the modules, and you get the option to load each of these as individual inserts, which I don't have with the normal version. But for an extra 500 quid, it really isn't worth paying for that. But the 200, 250 quid, that's the same price as 1 or 2 Waves plugins, and you get 7 here, and they are 7 quality plugins. Really recommend it. So if you're looking for something to buy on the mastering side of things, you won't go wrong with Ozone 5. Okay, so the one thing I'll say with Ozone, this button here for graph, you don't have to order your mix through the modules as they appear down the bottom. You can see here we can move anything around where we want. Now, this is the order I like to keep it in, with some EQ, a bit of reverb. You can see a shared crossover. I'll come on to that shortly. A second EQ to level everything out once you've done all your processing, and then your loudness maximizer. And then you can go through your spectrum analyzers and meters in different ways if you wanted to, but they're not really necessary to go through. First thing I do by the time I get to this stage is I've got a brick wall high pass filter at about 30 Hertz just to cut off that really low end. We don't want any of that really low stuff. A brilliant thing with Ozone is you can choose analog or a digital sort of behavior, so you might want to roll off if you prefer digital. I will always, or most of the time, choose analog wherever possible because I prefer the sound. Now, if we get this playing, it's got a wonderful capture option. Which is really handy. You can see what your EQ curve is looking like and see, for example, this is something that would catch my eye. This little bump up here at about 300. In my experience, I'll know that 300 might be somewhere that there's a type of frequency that's a bit muddy or something that I don't like, so I might experiment with a something there, just maybe trying to pull that out a bit. Going the wrong way there, but this display is really handy to line up with these frequencies and make sure you're doing everything in the right way. Equalizing and mastering, it's worth me pointing out at this stage, if you see this EQ curve that I've created here, that's pretty much what you're looking for. You want a bump between about 50 and 150 where your bass guitar and kick drum and real low end is sitting. That's always got to be the highest point, and then you want a gradual slope off until you get to about 10 or 12, and then it should drop off a bit harder. That is usually a good indication that your EQ is fairly well balanced. Now, that should all be occurring in the mix stage. You shouldn't be doing anything drastic in the mastering stage except for maybe a high pass and low pass there on the low end. If you're coming along and doing some big wide things, really, you've probably done something wrong in the mix, and it's probably worth going back and having a look. I find the best results are when I find something like this little bump here that I want to reduce, where you're doing little changes, and again, only by maybe 1 or 2 dB. You won't want to be doing, sort of 4 or 5 dB of change here, because that really is an indication that something's gone wrong earlier on. So do be careful with that, and remember, mastering isn't like mixing. You're not meant to be changing too drastically on that front at this stage. This EQ, more than anything, is really just to test that everything has worked well in your mix, and then set up your high pass, and then you should be ready to go. Moving on to a reverb. the reverb in Ozone, what I really like about it is you've got a high and low pass filter. I do tend to high pass above about 150 because I don't want reverb on the real low end that can create a lot of woofy sort of noise that can really affect how much loudness you can get out of the piece. A high pass filter I don't tend to keep on. I like reverb on the high end because that softens it up a bit. So metal can suffer sometimes from some harsh high end, so I prefer having the reverb up there. It's nice at helping roll that off nicely and keep it nice. Ozone has a wonderful wet dry mix, so you can just listen to your wet mix if you wanted to bring your dry mix down and play that, and you can just hear what effect the reverb is having, and then dial in your dry mix. And I think reverb on a master is underestimated. I will not put too much on. This sort of 10% is maybe the maximum I would add, and you don't hear so much on the master when it's there, but it really sort of fools the ear. As I say, it's really nice at rounding off that high end, and I wouldn't dismiss it. If you think it's going to add muddiness to your mix, it very rarely does that if you use it properly. If you don't have a module like this in Ozone, what I would do is set up an auxiliary bus. If we look back on Cubase here, I would have something like my master tape track here. I would have this FX track, which I've set up, and it put a reverb on it like this, and it's very, very short tail. And then you can play both of those together and dial in a small amount of your auxiliary track to help boost that sound, and it helps tie everything together really nicely. It makes everything feel like it's being played in the same room together. Ignore that at your peril. It's really is something worth doing. Harmonic Exciter is not something I'm using in Ozone because I use the Kramer master tape to add my analog harmonics. I'm not going to double up on that again with the Ozone one, but they do have different options here for you: tape, tube, warm, and retro. I would say this is one module where Ozone falls down a bit. It's not particularly good, this serviceable, but I think if you've got something like Beric, which is a free one by Variety of Sound, that's going to give you much better results than this Ozone one. Okay, multiband compression. This is an important aspect. One thing you'll notice is 4-band, and you can see the crossovers here. They are where I've decided to set. If I bring this graph up, you'll remember earlier I said there's a shared crossover. Now, what this means is the harmonic exciter, the multiband compressor, and the stereo imaging are all 4-band. And by shared crossover, what it's going to do is make sure the 4 bands keep the same crossover points. Apparently, according to the manual, that stops phasing issues and makes it sound tighter. I can believe that because it does makes things sound pretty tight. So that's something worth knowing. You can turn that off if you wanted to. If I was to change one of the ratios here, then I think that would not affect the others and it would no longer share the crossover, but something worth doing. Now with the multiband compressor, under compression ratio, I'm not going to do more than about 1.5 to 2. I tend to keep it about 1.5 on here. And the threshold is also very important because what this multiband compression is going to do for us is just going to pull down those peaks ever so slightly again. So I'm going to play this and then adjust the threshold here so that you'll see there's just a tiny amount of gain reduction going on.
When the light begins to fade, I begin to lose my name. When the darker eyes, we all become the same. So we're living in the dust, and we're showing in regret. And it's taking on, it's better we forgot. Give yourself to what you know, and weigh your worth in.
That's it. There's a good demonstration here actually. If I put this on, you'll see it's showing how the compressor's working as the track runs.
Deny the fear that makes us fall. Deny the lie that lives within.
Thought I'd just show you there. That's a really good example of little tricks Ozone comes with that's well worth the money getting. You can see quite how much compression is going on there, but you may have noticed under the threshold meters here and here that there really wasn't much compression going on there. Stereo imaging this is another magic bullet when it comes to home mastering. The way your ear likes to perceive sound, it prefers bass sounds coming from a single source in front of you, and it prefers higher frequencies and higher signals coming from any direction. That's why, over the course of history and man and music, we have preferred to have things like kick drums and bass coming down the center in a more mono fashion, and the higher things coming round out the sides, and why guitars can be panned wide, for example. Now, stereo imaging works to tie these frequencies together and pull the bass towards the middle a bit and push the higher frequencies out towards the sides a bit, and you can choose how much it's doing that. What I would do as an example, if I solo my bass, I'm going to put the bass width up to 100%. I'll press play and then I'll pull that back down to minus 100%, and you'll see what sort of difference that makes. That's quite a marked difference, and you can imagine what that's doing to your mix when you've got the bass wide and that woolliness is filling up the whole spectrum. Pulling that in a lot can really clean your mix up. Now, I don't go too extreme. I wouldn't go beyond about 30 or 40% in one direction. You'll see the slope I've got here. I don't take the high frequencies out too far either. You don't want to go crazy with this. You never want to go crazy with many VSTs. If you're pushing things to their max with these, then it's likely you're probably doing something wrong. They're not designed to push them to up to 11. They're designed to tweak here and there to polish things off. That in itself tidies the whole mix up nicely. I'm not going to solo that. We're going to show you a solo in a second of how things compare together. Finally, on the EQ front, there's a post equalizer. This operates independently to the first one, so any changes I make here will not affect the first equalizer. This is just to tidy up. You can have a listen again to what you've done so far, and then see if there's any further peaks that you want to deal with. Again, I would maybe look at this one here and isolate it and pull it down if I needed to. But again, I've put another high pass brick wall at 30 because previous processing just tend to add in a little bit of real low end, so that's been cut off again. And then onto the maximizer. Now this works like any maximizer. If you've used one before, I shouldn't need to show you too much about it. They work similar to Waves ones, which is pretty good. Into sample detection. Now this is quite complicated to go in detail in its most basic form, even though I've got the margin set to minus 0.1 here so that it doesn't clip above that. Between the sample measurements, it's possible that a waveform can jump above that 0.1 and clip. So this intersample detection just prevents that happening. It's worth turning that on. Different character is the release, basically. You can make that sound pumpy, or you can make it sound a lot more transparent. Somewhere in the middle tends to work pretty well. Dither. I will be covering Dither in another episode of something when I do some more mixing videos very soon, actually. So I don't dither at this stage because I'm moving on to use another plugin after this. So only dither if it's your final plugin, because dither adds noise. You don't want to dither more than once. So for me, that would be on none. And the DC filter presents DC offset. Again, that's something else I'll be covering in another video soon. You do want to eliminate your DC offset, so click that. And just like with the multiband, we can see what effect this is having. Okay, you can see very, very small amounts of activity there. It's raised my general level quite well, but it's very little limiting going on there, which is exactly what I want. You don't want to go too far. You just pull that down until you just see a little bit of activity. That's the best way of doing it, making it sound transparent. So let's have a quick listen what the whole difference is now. I'll turn on everything that I've done. We'll see how that sounds different with the before and after, basically. Bypass everything. Okay, I think that's a pretty good result. Okay, now I'm not quite done there, as I do one more thing, and that is run it through the Waves L3 Multi-Maximizer. Now, if you don't have a multi-band maximizer, I don't suggest using something like the Cubase stock one for this stage, because without the multi-band element, you probably will be doing more harm than good to your mix. The Ozone one is fairly capable. What I like to do with this final one, though, is it's good with the multi-band aspect just to pull down things like the low mids. Often the kick still will peak slightly more than everything else, possibly sometimes the snare, and the odd little frequencies here and there that a multi-band maximizer is better at pulling out and reducing without any damage to the sound. But again, we're going to be doing a very small amount of adjustment here. And finally, this is also where I'll be adding my dither, as you can see down here, which is quantized to 16 bits, because when you're mixing down your final master, you also want that to be at 16-bit 44.1 ready for a CD. So keep your quantizing to the same thing there. Now, as I play this, you'll see I only want the tiniest amount of movement to be going ahead here. Don't know if you could see that there even on the YouTube compression, the way it sometimes damages the image, but very small amounts of compression going on there. I do adjust the priority and the gain ever so slightly here. What I will do, if enough people ask for it, I may do a small tutorial on using the L3 properly, because it is a bit more than just pulling down the threshold and hoping for the best. But at the same time, I think a lot of people probably know how to use it. So let me know if you want a tutorial on that, then do say, and I'm happy to provide one, because there are things you can do to sort of maximize your use with it properly. That would then be it. Once I've bounced that down, I would then end up with my final mix as I've shown you here. Now, if I look at the statistics for that, it's pretty loud. I think I may have actually pushed it slightly too hard for this, but the max RMS minus 7.26, that's pretty loud, actually. I would normally aim for minus 9. Now, you'll see down here, EBU R128 minus 9.3. This is a whole new can of worms for us here. In 2012, they introduced this whole new way of measuring loudness. Again, if people want a video on that, let me know and I'll do my best to explain it. It's not the most interesting or easiest thing to talk about, but I will do if people need it. The old RMS up here is how we used to measure sound, up until 2012. So most of your equipment and most of my equipment will be working on these, and the RMS is what people are used to. And as I say, I try and get mine to minus 9. 7.2 is probably too much. I've heard more than one mastering engineer say that minus 8 is really the most you should aim for while still maintaining your full dynamic range. So I've probably pushed it slightly too far there, but that's what mastering's about. I'd look at these, I'd probably go back and redo it again and see what happens. Okay, well, there we go. I hope that was some help to you, to show you my workflow process to get my mix sounding from just a raw mix up to the final master that you hear. This song, From a Darker Past, is going to be available on YouTube very soon. I'll put a link on screen now and in the description to the song when it appears in my playlist. It will go up a day or two after my after this video goes live. As I say, I've just seen, I think I may need to remaster it to make it a bit more dynamic. We'll see how that turns out. Thank you very much for watching. I'll have another video up soon. Cheers.